Poilievre is ascendant. He dominates Trudeau completely in question period. Trudeau comes in with things that are written for him on a piece of paper, but it's not natural. Poilievre is a fighter. He's a debater. He loves the cut and thrust.
There is a cabinet retreat. It's the summer's end cabinet retreat that governments usually have, and we'll be getting into that. So this is the first article is I believe it's from National Post. So let's take a look at that. Storm clouds still heavy around Liberals as cabinet meets for retreat in Halifax. So the start of this article talked about the fact about this is almost deja vu, because Trudeau had this big cabinet retreat where they were going to meet and work on all of the issues plaguing Canada, bring everybody back into the Liberal fold, and everything was going to work and they were going to be fine. And it's a spoiler, they did not, as in they did not achieve anything over the last 12 months. Trudeau and his team are so far behind the Conservatives in the polls that if they were on a running track, they'd have been lapped by now, I would argue twice. And with the next election at most a year away, the runway to recover is growing shorter by the day. Interest rates have started to come down. Inflation is back in the normal range. Wage growth has been strong. Again, the issue being that the interest rates are coming down because the economy is tanking and we are going into a recession. That's one of the main reasons that inflation and the interest rates are coming down. But housing costs and availability remain extremely challenging. Food prices are still high, and the Liberals have been unable to counter messaging from Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre that life has become more expensive and unsafe under Trudeau's watch.
In June, the Liberals lost a long-held Toronto seat to the Conservatives, further eroding what was left of the fragile confidence the party had that they could stage a miraculous comeback with Trudeau still at the helm. The cabinet met briefly online over the summer to sign off on some appointments, but the working dinner that kicks off the retreat Sunday will mark the first in-person meeting since that by-election. Marcy Sirks, the chief strategy officer at the Compass Rose government relations firm and a former senior Liberal staffer, said most cabinet retreats are 90% focused on the business of government and 10% on politics and caucus management. This time, she said, there may be more focus on the latter, especially in the more informal conversations on the sidelines.
Both the Toronto-St. Paul's by-election, which the Liberals lost in June, and an upcoming by-election in Montreal, LaSalle, and Verdun riding, came after former ministers who lost their portfolios, Carolyn Bennett and David Lametti, chose to exit politics altogether. Bennett's seat in Toronto was lost to the Conservatives after being a Liberal stronghold for nearly 30 years, and Lametti's is in danger of being taken by the NDP when that vote happens September 16th, something Sirks said would be a quote-unquote devastating blow. While the agenda may not be as interesting as the politics at this retreat, the ministers do have a set itinerary for their discussions. The retreat includes a full day of meetings Monday on housing, fairness, and affordability, and the middle class.
What is not lost on many Liberals is that President Joe Biden's decision to drop out of the presidential race brought a sudden surge of energy and momentum for the Democrats. Speculation about Trudeau's future has been a favorite game in Canadian political circles, for years, although he has not suggested that he is even considering leaving. Sirks said she doesn't think what happened for the Democrats will compel Trudeau to follow Biden's lead. Quote, I expect to see lots of borrowing of technique, borrowing of language, but a wholesale shift in terms of the person at the front of the stage and on the podium. I don't know that that is in store for the Liberals in the coming weeks, she said. But there's no question in my mind that much of what we're seeing down there is going to find its way into what happens here in the next 6 months in terms of agenda, end quote. So, sorry, who again is importing American-style politics into Canada?
Right. Like, give me a break. This is the revealing of the hypocrisy, both in the mainstream media and in the liberals. So, like, they are constantly trying to accuse the conservatives of being the ones to import American-style politics, yet they are literally following the playbook and saying, hey, what are the Democrats doing down there? Let's do that up here. But it's not us that's important. Like, it is crazy. It is absolutely crazy. But here's the problem. In order for them to follow the Democrats' playbook, they would have to convince a non-elderly, debatably non-senile Trudeau.
I mean, he's probably not senile, but he's not really in his right mind.
He's not
either.
all there. They'd have to convince him to step down. Good luck with that. Good luck with that. Again, the big problem is that there's no mechanism for that, and we're going to see that in the next article. So that was from the National Post, so that was, a little bit more to the right. And now we're going to go to the Globe and Mail, which is a little bit more to the left, because we want that balanced perspective, so we can kind of distill what's between both of them. And that's where the truth lies. Justin Trudeau must call a leadership race before it's too late. I'm pretty sure it's too late, but we'll go with that.
Yeah, I would have a very difficult time, believing that they could turn this ship around in a year. Something is rotten in the state of the Liberal Party. The polls show the Liberals tumbling towards electoral defeat when the next election is called. So unpopular is Prime Minister Justin Trudeau that Canadians of all stripes and backgrounds seem prepared to deliver the Conservatives the House of Commons in a landslide. I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that the fate of the Liberal Party itself is now at stake. Let's be honest, after almost a decade in power, Mr. Trudeau and the current Liberal leadership have run out of ideas. All the dynamism and energy are with the Conservatives. The anger today is singularly directed at Mr. Trudeau. This is not surprising. The Trudeau Liberals built their entire brand around the Prime Minister's personal appeal. When Canadians soured on his integrity and his effectiveness, they also soured on the Liberals. Should Mr. Trudeau decide to lead the Liberals into the next election, he will take the party down with him in what will likely be a generational defeat. That's huge.
Yeah. And this is significant. Listen to this part. I say this as a Liberal, a former advisor in this current government, and a citizen. The moment of decision has arrived. Either we rush headfirst into electoral disaster, or we make a wise choice now. Otherwise, the Conservatives will decimate the Liberals and undo the entire Liberal agenda. They will leave Liberals in ruins for years. The progress of the past few decades will be wiped out. It's time for Mr. Trudeau to do the right thing for his party and country and call a leadership race. Mr. Trudeau has already been in office longer than a two-term U.S. president. If he wants to serve longer, when polls indicate that Canadians have lost faith in him, he needs to earn the backing of Liberals across the country. It's now or never for Liberals to change course. And here's the onion.
Under the Liberal Party constitution, the party leader cannot be removed unless there is a quote-unquote triggering event, such as an electoral loss or incapacitation. Therefore, the only way for Mr. Trudeau to cede power now is if he voluntarily relinquishes it. This would be a democratic act, putting faith in the future and inviting newcomers to step up and carry the baton forward. If Mr. Trudeau believes he is still the best choice for the Liberals, who have not had a say in the leadership since 2013, he can seek the leadership again, but only in a fair and competitive race. Cabinet ministers and outsiders should also run and pitch Liberals on their vision for the future. A leadership race now would only be to the advantage of the Liberals. It would show Canadians that Mr. Trudeau puts the country first and wants to give Liberals a voice in who should lead them. It would allow for a vigorous internal debate about what the party stands for and how to navigate the multiple crises Canadians face. It would welcome new party members to participate in the process and cast their ballots in a convention that would reinvigorate the party. Most importantly, it would show the public that the Liberal Party is listening to them and is prepared to lead once again.
Well, this is the problem. He's delivering for Canadians. And the fact that he won't even listen to his own party, folks, which is, what you're about to hear. There's no way he's prepared to listen to Canadians. So let's get into some CTV commentary, because they had two different people commenting on this. They had Mr. Tom Mulcair weighing in, as well as Miss Turnbull.
What are the Liberals hoping to have come out of this retreat?
Well, I mean, this is just a few weeks before they return to Parliament for the fall session. And I think, they're thinking about where they are in the polls. What are they going to do politically? How is this going to work with the NDP as they've got this continued confidence and supply agreement? But also, they're still the government, right? Even though we can see all of the polls that indicate they've got all kinds of things to worry about politically, they still have to manage an agenda. They still have to get things through Parliament. And as their agenda indicates, they're looking at a pretty significant decision that's going to happen in the U.S. this fall. And so they're thinking about how they're managing that relationship as well.
And that is a big unknown right now. The thing that we're talking about will likely see come out some kind of a housing mention. Is that enough to help turn their fortunes around?
No, I suspect not. I don't know that train can be reversed at this point. I think that probably the biggest thing that's affecting the Liberals' polling right now is voter fatigue. People are, they've been in government for, it'll be 10 years next year. People are looking around. People are, it's normal for people to want something fresh. This typically happens when a government is 8, 9 years old. And so I think even if they were trying to say things that are resonating with what people are worrying about, I think probably they're at a point where it's a big ask to ask Canadians to give them a fourth term. Now, that said, it doesn't mean that they won't have potential high points over the next year or so. It doesn't mean that they, can't make decisions that could potentially, make people feel better about them. But at the same time, I think, we've seen the summer go by and they didn't do anything massive after that by-election loss in Toronto. They didn't do anything massive to shift gears, no cabinet shuffle, obviously no leader shuffle, no different messaging, just kind of keeping things going. And so I'm not sure really at this point that Canadians are really listening all that hard to what the Liberals are saying.
And with the, you mentioned the cabinet shuffle, that was the one thing everybody was predicting. There's going to be a big cabinet shuffle, and it looks like nothing's going to happen before they head back to Ottawa.
Yeah, I mean, if it was going to happen, I think we'd know it by now. And there was speculation about whether Mark Carney was going to come in, what role he might play, how that would work, given the fact that Freeland is, still there as finance minister. And there was a bit of mumbling about what could potentially be happening, whether the prime minister had lost confidence in her. But none of that has happened. Like, the summer has kind of just gone by with the prime minister having I think, quieter conversations around the country. He's doing a lot of traveling, I assume talking to caucus members, because this is a cabinet retreat that's happening today over the next couple of days. I think where, it's going to get a little bit more uncomfortable for the prime minister is during a caucus retreat, where the caucus members are coming and saying, we've got to hit the campaign trail sometime in the next year or so and go and ask people for a vote again, when it just doesn't seem like we've done anything to press refresh on this thing for real. And so I think the prime minister is going to get more of a supportive tone around him at the cabinet retreat, because that's his government. But the caucus is going to be a different story.
So, yeah, a couple things there. I love that she doesn't attribute Trudeau's terrible government decisions and policies as to why Canadians are ticked and why Canadians are just not siding with the Liberals in the polls at this point. She's like, no, it's fatigue. Are you kidding me?
Well, I mean, to some degree, Canadians
we're fatigued from his policies.
No, well, Canadians do tire of the governing party, usually after anywhere between 8 to 10 years. But in this case, I don't think it's that. In this case, I think it's that the Liberals came in and started destroying everything that this country stood for and everything that we held near and dear. And it's like finally visible to the average Canadian now.
Yeah, like I could understand voter fatigue if unemployment was stable, if poverty was low, if house affordability was stable, and it's been 8 or 9 years and there wasn't that much change in what's going on. Like there wasn't any new flashy toys coming in. That's what you call voter fatigue. But when you're talking poverty at probably its highest level since the Great Depression, at 10 million Canadians, when you're talking about all of these tent cities all over Canada because of housing affordability, when you're talking about food costing as much as it does, violent crime up over 50%, domestic or violence against women, never mind everybody else, up 75% since 2015, and all of the other metrics, drug overdoses and everything else. That's not voter fatigue, lady. That is terrible policies and Canadians recognizing them and waking up to them. So I respectfully disagree with that. Now, the other thing that she talked about is the fact that Trudeau isn't making any cabinet changes. So this is very interesting, considering at the very beginning of the summer, his caucus was like, at least Freeland's got to go. You've got to step down, or we need to see major changes. We need to see something. And Trudeau decided, okay, I hear you. Thank you for your feedback, but I'm not changing a darn thing.
Well, it sounded like for a while that he was going to throw Freeland under the bus and that we were going to have ourselves a new finance minister.
I think he was testing the waters, and that's why he publicly did it, just to see what the public reaction would be.
But it seems now like he's just like, Justin heard you. Justin don't care. It's not happening.
Well, and what I bet he's been doing is having private meetings with these people saying, shh, you can't be doing this because you're going to impact the whole party and that's going to impact you too. So, the more you talk about this, the worse it is for all of us. So you better shut your mouth. Like, just be quiet. So I bet you that's what he's been doing, to try and silence everybody. So it's going to be really interesting to see what happens when everyone comes back to government and what people start saying. Because in the scrums, if the journalists are worth their salt, they're going to be sopping these MPs saying, hey, so you said this before, what are you going to say now? And they're going to be on camera and they're going to be recorded saying whatever they think is going to happen. So it's going to be really interesting to see what those sound bites end up being. So we're going to be paying pretty close attention to that. Let's go to the second video. So this is with Mr. Tom Mulcair.
So, Tom, the Liberal caucus retreat begins in Halifax today. What can we expect to be on the agenda?
Well, this year's cabinet retreat resembles last year's cabinet retreat. It's actually Groundhog Day because last year, Renee, the top item on the agenda was the housing crisis that had been caused during the Liberal reign. And this year's top item is the housing crisis that took place while the Liberals were in power. And it took place because Canada has had a policy of vastly increasing immigration. We all understand and appreciate the country was built by immigrants, waves and waves coming in, but you have to have a little bit of planning if you're going to bring in the equivalent of the population of Manitoba every year, and there was no planning. This was an idea pushed by Dominic Barton, pushed by very smart people on Mr. Trudeau who bought into it completely.
Did you catch that name?
Dominic Barton. Where have we heard about Dominic Barton from?
Well, he's from McKinsey, but he's also from the Century Initiative.
Right. And he said, a bunch of very smart people, in Trudeau's circle, bought into this.
In the Century Initiative?
As in the Century Initiative. So, yeah.
And if you missed our video on that, make sure you go back and check it out. We dropped it about a month ago.
Yes.
So
yes.
If you search our channel for the Century Initiative, it should come right up.
We're pretty proud of that piece, but it's also very disturbing as well when you get into it if you haven't heard of it.
But of course, if you're going to do that, you have to plan for health services, social services, and yes, housing. So they're always going to be late trying to catch up on this thing, saying they're going to be building millions and millions of housing units. But frankly, it sounds very empty at this stage of the game, and I don't think Canadians are buying into it.
Are you expecting any progress to come out of this?
Well, on housing, they do have one good idea. saying that there is lots of federal land available. And they're talking about leasing it to developers, which is an interesting idea, and saying that the developers will have a chance to use that. They won't have to have that big capital outlay at the beginning of a project, and they can use that to build social housing. Now, if there are enough developers who are willing to do that, fine. But again, Renee, between now and the next election, not much is going to come of any of this except for putting a decently good idea on the table. But it's not going to solve the problem, anything but. You know, as we're heading into that cabinet retreat, you had that big picture that we were just seeing on our screens before you and I had a chance to speak, and you see how Mr. Trudeau has managed the country. That cabinet is just massive. And I would dare to say that most Canadians can't name more than a few people in that picture, because instead of having a very strong cabinet with a core group of people who can push big ideas forward, Mr. Trudeau's answer with the civil service is a massive increase in the number of bureaucrats. His answer with regard to his cabinet is a massive cabinet, but it's not working. And, you know, there's an old saying that when what you're doing doesn't work, try something else. And he just seems to be trying the same thing over and over again. There is one thing I'm going to keep an eye on with regard to this cabinet retreat. Pablo Rodriguez, who's got a very important dossier. It's transport. You know, we're in the middle of this huge problem with our railroads in Canada. He has already signaled that he's thinking of running for the Quebec Liberal leadership. Well, he'd better figure that out and give a clear signal to Mr. Trudeau. And it's been several weeks now that he's been talking about it. And it's very uncomfortable for Mr. Trudeau because he's his Quebec lieutenant. So that's going to have to get figured out. And I don't think we're going to have a big cabinet shuffle, but I do think that we're going to have to Mr. Trudeau's going to have to try to figure out what to do about Mr. Rodriguez, and I would say he's probably going to have to replace him as transport minister. You can't be musing about going, leaving the sinking ship and going to another job and hope to stay there at the same time. So unless they've come up with a deal on their own, I think that Rodriguez is gone.
When looking at the polls before cabinet resumes in a few weeks, how is the Liberal Party doing? Because this is really going to be their final time for a reset.
Exactly. And that's what you and I were saying last summer when they went to Prince Edward Island. So yes, Parliament will be back in a few weeks. Yes, it will be the set piece arguments between Mr. Poilievre and Mr. Trudeau. Poilievre is ascendant. He dominates Trudeau completely in question period. Trudeau comes in with things that are written for him on a piece of paper, but it's not natural. Poilievre is a fighter. He's a debater. He loves the cut and thrust. Now, what Conservatives have to realize is they haven't won anything yet. It's one thing to be way ahead in the polls, but I think that, as a lot of observers have been remarking, one of the things you have to understand is that that's a reflection of the fact that people are just tired of Mr. Trudeau. He starts his 10th year in office in October. There is a finite limit to how much Canadians will put up with. We don't have the two-term rule like the Americans, 2 4-year term, but it's almost as if we did, Renee, because people do get very tired of seeing Mr. Trudeau. They're looking for change. Mark Carney is waiting in the wings. Everybody knows that. It's talked about openly, and he could probably change the Liberal fortunes overnight. The same way Kamala Harris coming in was able to change the Democrats' fortunes in the United States. But is Mr. Trudeau going to finally get that message? It's far from clear that that's the case.
Very interesting, and that's something we'll be keeping a very close eye on as well.
It's very interesting how the biases come through, and we have biases as well,
obviously.
But and we never claim to be completely neutral, but we're biased towards common sense. So when they say things like, well, the Conservatives have to remember that the only reason they're polling so high is because Canadians are tired of Trudeau. It's very, very...
I think the Conservatives are polling so high because they're the only party making common sense. They're the most towards the center.
Well, and if you go outside of Ottawa, the vast majority, over 70% of Canadians, don't want the carbon tax because they don't believe in it.
Well, and that's what Franco told us. He said, outside of that core group in Ottawa, nobody wants a carbon tax.
Right, because everyone knows it's garbage. It's bull. It's
costing us so much.
So it is. It's just. It's disappointing that they come on and they're like, oh well, I'm being objective and I'm saying these things, but it's obviously you're not. Tom Mulcair is a left-leaning individual, so he doesn't want the Conservatives in power. Anything but. So obviously he's going to say, well, some observers. That's like the reporter saying to Pierre, so experts are saying, oh, who are these experts?
Who are these observers?
Yeah. Tell me who they are. Like, Bob on the street. I don't care what Bob on the street says. Like, it really doesn't matter. What it matters is the polling. With Trudeau's cabinet retreat, he is playing with fire here. He is absolutely playing with fire with his caucus. They threw down the gauntlet at the beginning of the summer, and he's done literally nothing. Absolutely nothing except ignore them and probably tell them, you guys all need to calm down here. Okay, so you've gone through the summer. Your polls have not changed really at all. And let's take a look at some of those polls, shall we? This is the latest Nanos poll. So again, this is leaning a little bit more to the Liberals. But this goes back to August, so end of the summer of 2014. So you can see the trend line here, and it goes through the two elections, for 2019 and 2021. Now, the thing to notice is from 2022 onward, and you look past that, the previous 7 years, the Conservatives have not been ahead for this much, for this long, ever in that time period.
Hey, wait a second. Where's the Canada Future Party?
Oh, they're off the chart here. They're off the chart. They're
in the basement.
They're delisted. They count as a penny stock, I guess, on the polling here.
Sorry, I couldn't resist.
They're the faint gray flat line there because there's no votes. So, and you see since Trudeau was elected, there's a trend line that just goes down the whole time. So that's where you're looking. And you saw where the NDP was right before the 2015 election. Then they changed leaders and into the floor. So have fun with that. And then obviously the Green and the Bloc are doing what they're doing. So it's amazing. At one point the Green was almost near the NDP level. That was back in 2018. So impressive. But now they're back where they belong, right at the bottom. So that's the polls for the parties. And this is preferred prime minister. So you see going way back, again, Trudeau was up there when
Why?
He did his... Because everyone thought, oh, surely he's not going to be as bad as his dad. And there you go, right? So... And now you have Pierre leading the pack at 34. Is that super high? Nope. Is it good enough? Yep.
It's higher than Trudeau.
By 14 points. So there you have it, folks.